They asked her to leave without an explanation, but Karoline wasn't about to let that slide. She had settled into her usual corner booth at the Oak Room, a local bistro she had frequented for years. It wasn't just any restaurant, it was her sanctuary, where the waiters knew her name and the manager always stopped by to check on her. It was the place that gave her comfort and familiarity. That day had started like any other. She had just finished a meeting and had come to unwind. The aroma of freshly baked bread and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Karoline sat by the window, her favorite spot, from where she could watch the changes in the neighborhood. She noticed a new face among the staff, a tall, middle-aged man in a sharp suit. It wasn't unusual, new hires came and went. When the waiter arrived, Karoline ordered her usual grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, already anticipating the meal. But before the waiter could leave, the new man walked over and, with a low but firm voice, told her she had to leave. Confused, Karoline leaned forward, asking for an explanation, but he repeated his demand, more insistent this time. His body language was stiff, as if expecting her to argue. She glanced around at the other diners who were watching but not speaking. She felt a flash of confusion, but quickly regained her composure. Karoline had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this felt different. She asked him calmly why she was being asked to leave. He responded coldly, saying he didn't need to explain. Though her heart raced, Karoline kept her emotions in check, knowing people sometimes had power trips. She wasn't about to let that happen. She insisted that he should explain, as any other customer would expect. The man hesitated, then glanced at the manager, who was watching from the kitchen doorway without intervening. That was strange. The manager had always been friendly, chatting with customers, ensuring everyone was comfortable. Why wasn't he stepping in now? Karoline's frustration grew, but she remained calm. The man finally gave the weak excuse that she was disturbing the other customers, but Karoline saw no disturbance. She calmly pointed out that the restaurant was public, and she wasn't bothering anyone. Still, something didn't sit right. There had to be another reason behind this, and she needed to know why she was being asked to leave. She told the man she'd leave, but only if she understood why. The manager still hadn't moved, staring at them both. Karoline stood her ground, knowing this wasn't just about the meal, but about respect. She had been a loyal customer for years, and she wasn't going to let this slide. The man's posture remained rigid, as if waiting for her to argue. His eyes flickered between her and the manager, who remained silent by the kitchen door. The tension in the air was palpable, and Karoline could sense that everyone in the restaurant was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. She couldn't help but wonder what was really going on here. Why was she being singled out like this? It didn't make sense, and the longer the silence stretched, the more she realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone had made a decision about her that she didn't even know about. "You haven't given me a reason," Karoline said again, her voice unwavering. The man's jaw clenched, and he looked over at the manager once more, who had finally started walking toward them. There was a flash of annoyance on the manager's face, but he said nothing as he approached. "I'm sorry," the manager finally said, his tone uncomfortably neutral. "We've had a complaint about you." Karoline blinked, taken aback. A complaint about her? Her mind raced, unable to recall doing anything that would warrant a complaint. She'd always been polite, never causing a scene. "What kind of complaint?" she asked. The manager hesitated. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information," he said stiffly. Karoline felt a surge of disbelief. "You're telling me you're going to ask me to leave over something I don't even know about?" The man standing next to her didn't say anything, but his posture stiffened further. It was clear that the situation was becoming uncomfortable for him too, but Karoline didn't care about making him uncomfortable. She cared about getting the truth. "I don't think this is right," Karoline said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "I've been coming here for years. I've never caused any problems. If someone has an issue with me, I deserve to know what it is." The manager's eyes flickered, and Karoline could see the hint of a struggle on his face. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was considering backing down, but instead, he cleared his throat and stuck to his position. "I'm sorry, but I've been instructed to ask you to leave," he said. "Jim," he added, his tone now sounding more apologetic. Karoline took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. Her pulse was rising, but she refused to let her emotions take control. She wasn't just going to walk out without understanding why this was happening. She turned her gaze back to the man beside her, her voice low but firm. "I'm not leaving until I get an explanation. I've been a loyal customer here, and I won't be treated this way without knowing why." For a moment, it looked like the man might argue, but instead, he just shook his head slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The manager, too, seemed caught between wanting to handle this quickly and realizing that Karoline wasn't going to back down. "Listen," Karoline said, her tone softening just a little. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I just want to understand what's going on. If there's a legitimate reason for me to leave, I'll go, but I deserve to know what it is." The manager looked at her, then back at the man. There was a moment of hesitation before he finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he repeated, "it's just protocol." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Protocol," she echoed the word, hanging in the air. "What protocol? I've been coming here for years. This place has always been welcoming. What's changed?" The man and the manager exchanged an unreadable look, as if they were both waiting for something, maybe for Karoline to break, maybe for her to leave without asking more questions. But she wasn't about to do that, not now. The silence stretched, and for a moment, Karoline thought she might be getting nowhere. But then something shifted. The tension continued to build, and Karoline could sense that this situation wasn't about to end quietly. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. Karoline felt like the eyes of every single person in the restaurant were fixed on her. The tension hung thick in the air. She could sense the manager and the man beside her both growing more uneasy by the second. But she wasn't about to back down. She needed answers, and she wasn't leaving until she got them. "I'm still waiting for an explanation," Karoline said, her voice even but firm. She wasn't going to let the situation slide just because it was awkward or uncomfortable. "Why am I being asked to leave? What complaint could possibly justify this?" The manager shifted uncomfortably, as though he was trying to decide whether he should continue with this bizarre charade or finally come clean. Karoline could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. For a brief second, she saw the manager's face soften, perhaps just for a fleeting moment, but he quickly masked it with an impersonal expression. "I don't have all the details," the manager said, his voice growing quieter. "I was just told to handle it. But I assure you, we don't normally ask people to leave for no reason." Karoline took a deep breath. The manager's words felt hollow, and she could sense he was struggling with the situation. He had to know something wasn't right, and yet he was still clinging to the directive he'd been given. "Can you at least tell me who made this decision?" she pressed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who gave the order?" The manager hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the man standing by her side. "It came from the owner," he finally muttered, as though it pained him to admit it. "But like I said, I don't know the full reason." Karoline's heart raced. The owner? That was a name she hadn't heard in a long time. The Oak Room had been her go-to spot for years, and she knew the owner, a woman named Joan. Joan had always been kind, attentive, and understanding. Karoline had never once felt unwelcome there. She stared at the manager. "Joan? The owner? That doesn't make sense. I've known her for years. Why would she ask me to leave without any explanation?" The manager glanced back at the man, clearly uncomfortable with the line of questioning. Karoline didn't let up, though. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to shift in her mind, and something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just a random complaint or some routine misunderstanding. There was more at play here. Something deeper. But what? The man standing beside her, who had been eerily silent up until this point, finally spoke up. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low and slightly apologetic, though his words were still firm. "It was just a misunderstanding." Karoline tilted her head. A misunderstanding? Then why didn't anyone clarify it before things got this far? She gestured around the room. I've been sitting here for over an hour, and no one said anything to me. The man shifted his weight, his eyes darting between her and the manager. It was clear now that he was uncomfortable, but Karoline wasn't about to let that stop her from getting to the truth. Something was fishy, and she was determined to figure out what. Look, she said, her voice steady and sharp. I've been loyal to this place. I've always treated people with respect, and I expect the same in return. If there's a misunderstanding, fine, but I deserve an explanation, not to be treated like this. There was another long pause. The tension was suffocating. The man seemed to be trying to muster some kind of response, but he wasn't sure how to proceed. He looked back at the manager again, who had yet to make eye contact with Karoline. But it wasn't until the manager spoke again that the first cracks in the mystery began to appear. The manager finally exhaled deeply, as if he had been holding his breath all this time. Karoline could see the weight of the situation pressing on him, but it wasn't just the pressure of the moment. It was guilt. He knew that something wasn't right, and he was finally starting to break under the tension. I'm really sorry for how this has gone, he said. The manager said, his voice wavering, but the owner, she had some concerns about you. Karoline's heart skipped a beat. Concerned for her? She hadn't done anything wrong, and she had no idea what the manager was talking about. Concerns? What kind of concerns? Karoline asked, her tone firm yet controlled. You're telling me I've been coming here for 4 years, and suddenly the owner has concerns about me? What happened? I need to know. The manager hesitated, his eyes darting to the man standing beside Karoline. The man seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. Karoline could see that he was still trying to figure out how to navigate this delicate situation, but Karoline wasn't going to let him off that easily. Not anymore. I'm just the manager. I don't know all the details, he muttered, shifting from one foot to the other. But I think it's something to do with the way you've been, with the way you've been engaging with other customers lately. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Engaging with other customers, she repeated, her voice edged with disbelief. What exactly are you implying? The man beside her suddenly stepped in, his voice low but urgent. Look, it's not about you, okay? It's just there was a misunderstanding about some of your interactions with other guests. He swallowed hard before continuing, as if carefully choosing his words. The owner thought you were making others uncomfortable. Karoline blinked, completely taken aback. This was the first she'd heard of anything like this, and it made no sense. She had always been friendly, polite, and respectful to the other patrons. Sure, she was outgoing and social, but never in a way that would make anyone feel uncomfortable. This whole situation felt like a twisted game, and Karoline wasn't going to let them play her. Making people uncomfortable? Karoline repeated, her voice rising slightly with confusion and frustration. How? In what way? I've been here for years and I've never had a complaint about my behavior. If someone felt uncomfortable, they should have said something. But I've never, not once, been told that I was doing anything wrong. The manager glanced nervously at the man again, but this time the man remained silent. Karoline could see that the walls around them were starting to crumble. She wasn't just questioning the situation anymore, she was calling them out for their inconsistency. The manager looked down, avoiding Karoline's gaze. Look, he said, his voice quieter now, I don't want to be in the middle of this. I'm just doing my job, but if you want to talk to Joan, maybe you should just give her a call. Karoline felt a surge of triumph, but she kept it contained. She wasn't going to settle for an apology and a simple phone call. No. This wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about making sure this kind of treatment didn't happen again. Fine, she said, her tone sharp and decisive. I'll call Joan, but before I leave, I need to hear the truth. No more vague excuses, no more dodging the question. The manager opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, his words trapped somewhere between regret and frustration. Karoline could tell that he was finally seeing how much he'd messed up. As the silence stretched on, Karoline stood tall, her confidence unwavering. She had taken control of the situation. It wasn't just about defending herself, it was about making sure her voice was heard. But what would Joan say when Karoline finally made that call? Would the owner admit to her mistake, or would this situation spiral even further? Karoline took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she wasn't going to let it overwhelm her. She had fought for the truth, and now it was time to hold the people responsible accountable. The manager had already begun to show signs of remorse, but that wasn't enough. Karoline wasn't here for half-hearted apologies. She wanted to hear from Joan herself. "Give me a moment," Karoline said to the manager, her voice steady. She wasn't asking for permission, but she was giving them the space to react. She pulled out her phone and dialed Joan's number, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The phone rang twice before Joan answered. Her voice was warm and familiar. "Karoline, it's been a while. How are you?" Karoline took a second to compose herself before responding. "I'm fine, Joan, but I need to talk to you about something urgent. I'm here at the Oak Room and I've just been asked to leave by your manager, with no explanation whatsoever. And to make matters worse, I'm being told that I've somehow made other customers uncomfortable. I need to know why this is happening." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Karoline could almost hear the gears turning in Joan's mind as she processed the situation. Joan had always been someone who took pride in making sure her restaurant was a place of comfort and respect. This didn't sound like the kind of issue that would have escalated this far without something going wrong. "Karoline, I'm so sorry," Joan said after a pause. "I had no idea any of this was happening. I trust my staff, but if there's been a misunderstanding, we need to sort it out." "What exactly happened?" Karoline's frustration melted slightly at Joan's genuine tone, but she stayed focused. "I've been a loyal customer here for years, Joan. I've never had an issue with anyone. Not once. If someone had a problem with me, they should have spoken up, but no one did. I'm being told there was a complaint about my behavior, but no one has told me what I supposedly did wrong. I'm here trying to enjoy my lunch, and now I'm being asked to leave." Joan let out a frustrated sigh. "I am so sorry for this. I've known you for years, Karoline. You've always been respectful and polite. If there's been any confusion, it should have been handled differently. I'll have a word with the manager immediately. This isn't how we run things." Karoline could feel her heart slow as the weight of the conversation began to settle. She wasn't just getting an apology, she was getting accountability. Joan wasn't making excuses or trying to brush the situation under the rug. "I appreciate that, Joan," Karoline said, her voice softening. "But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen to anyone else. I don't want to cause trouble. I can't just let this slide," Karoline said, her voice steady. "I understand," Joan replied. "I'll fix this right away. You deserve respect, and I'll make sure the staff knows that moving forward. I want you to feel comfortable when you come here." The conversation ended with Joan promising to handle the situation. Karoline hung up the phone and turned her attention back to the manager, who was standing awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. The man beside her had disappeared, likely retreating to avoid further confrontation. The manager cleared his throat. "I've spoken to Joan. She's very upset about what happened and has promised to make things right." Karoline nodded, satisfied with Joan's response, but not quite ready to let the manager off the hook just yet. "I appreciate you talking to her, but this whole thing could have been avoided if you had just communicated properly. I was a paying customer just trying to enjoy a meal. I shouldn't have been treated like this." The manager looked down, his face reddening. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I should have handled it differently. I'm really sorry for the way this went down." Karoline's expression softened. "Apology accepted, but remember, it's not just about making apologies. It's about treating people with respect from the start. No one should feel like this." The manager nodded earnestly. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Karoline gave him a small smile. I'm glad to hear it. Just make sure the next time something like this happens, communication is key. As she turned to leave, she could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, but this time it was different. She had taken control of the situation, stood up for herself, and shown that there was power in calm communication, even in the face of confusion and frustration. But as Karoline walked out of the restaurant, she knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was a reminder that respect and clarity were not just privileges but rights, and sometimes all it took was one person standing firm to bring about change. As Karoline stepped out of the oak room and into the cool afternoon air, she took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. The conflict was over, but it lingered in her mind. It wasn't just about the unpleasant exchange or the awkwardness of being asked to leave. It was about the principles behind it all. She had walked into that restaurant expecting nothing more than a pleasant meal, but instead, she'd been thrust into a situation that tested her patience, her ability to stand up for herself, and her belief in fairness. But now that it was over, Karoline felt a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't backed down, hadn't let her emotions take control, and had stayed calm and composed. She handled the situation with grace, and in the end, she had gotten the apology and clarity she deserved. More importantly, she had made sure the problem was addressed in a way that would ensure no one else would go through the same thing. As she walked down the street, heading back to her car, her thoughts began to shift from the events that had just unfolded to what she had learned from it. She knew that this wasn't just a story about a woman being asked to leave a restaurant. It was about the power of self-respect, the importance of communication, and how standing up for what's right can lead to positive change. She thought about how easily she could have walked out of the oak room in frustration, avoiding further confrontation. She could have simply accepted the vague explanation, left without saying a word, and chalked it up to a bad experience. But instead, she'd asked questions, demanded answers, and insisted on being treated with respect. And by doing so, she had not only resolved the conflict but also ensured that the manager and the owner knew exactly where she stood. But Karoline wasn't just proud of her ability to handle the situation, she was proud of how she had used her voice to make a difference, not just for herself, but for anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. This wasn't just about a meal or a restaurant, it was about taking a stand for fairness, dignity, and respect in all aspects of life. As she got into her car, Karoline smiled to herself, thinking about the lesson she had learned in the process. She had reminded herself and the people around her that standing up for yourself doesn't always require confrontation. It doesn't require raising your voice or creating chaos, sometimes it's about being calm, being confident in knowing your worth. Her mind drifted to the other customers who had witnessed the exchange. She wondered if they would see things differently now. She wondered if they would be more inclined to speak up if they found themselves in a similar situation. Karoline had always believed in the power of example, and in this case, she hoped her actions would serve as a reminder that standing up for what's right could lead to positive change, even in the smallest of moments. As she pulled out of the parking lot and drove down the street, Karoline couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had handled herself with grace, and she had made sure her voice was heard. And in the end, that was all anyone could really ask for. But as she thought about it, Karoline realized that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do in difficult situations is to simply remain calm, stand our ground, and always demand the respect we deserve. This was the lesson that she would carry with her moving forward, no matter where life took her next.